Hello, I'm Alfred Henson.
And I'm Patrick Johnson.
We want to give you an overview of how we created geospatial data and analytics for disaster recovery planning. And we're going to do that by looking at the flooding from 2015 to 2017, which was a 3-year period of flooding in Houston. We're going to also look at the initial data collection and to show you how that looks on the preliminary side for local data and how we can map to make some determinations on the front end or right after the hurricane or the flood. Then we're going to look at data needs for funding to add on to the initial data collection so we can provide HUD with a local housing needs assessment, which is how we justify how we're going to distribute funds and what amount of funding we need based on the housing unit damages and the counts on those. And then we're going to look at a couple of tools that derived and evolved from this new approach, which we were able to implement, and it'll be described later. When it rains, it pours in Houston. The water kind of sits in puddles. The flat terrain and extensive greenfield development combine the worsened flooding in Houston. Downtown stands about 50 feet, which is about 15 meters above sea level. And the highest point is in far northwest Houston, which is about 150 feet, which is about 46 meters in elevation. The drone footage that you're looking at now has been provided by the Houston Chronicle, and it helps us to see the devastation and help you all see the devastation that was caused by Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey was a catastrophic event, and it left about 51 inches of rainfall, which was received in a 5-day duration from August 25th to August 30th in 2017. This resulted in unprecedented and widespread pluvial flooding within the city of Houston region, even outside the floodway. The 598 square mile land area of Houston primarily lies within Harris County, but includes areas that fall in portions of Fort Bend and Montgomery County. The data that is about to populate in the story map is the raw FEMA and SBA data collected to show the impacted housing units that either applied for assistance or had insurance claims. As you can see, the city limits, which include Fort Bend and Montgomery County, the flooding points that happened from 2015, which was Memorial Day and Halloween Day, and in 2016, on tax day, and the following month, May 22nd, the flood events. And then you had 2017, as you can see, it pretty much covers the whole city. Then when you combine all that data from 2015 to 2017, it's a lot of water in Houston. So these 5 federally declared disasters, they really happened in 3 consistent years. And that damage, if it's underestimated, we could underestimate what the funding need is actually in Houston. So on the initial side of our data collection right after the storm, it involves collecting a lot of local data that was either readily available or it was collected after the storm by one of our departments, city departments. The initial data collection was also used for mapping to get an idea of where households were impacted in use. Existing methods for calculating residential damage and unmet need after a disaster were limited and had the potential, again, to severely underestimate recovery needs. So the major federal funding sources available for impacted citizens following a natural disaster are FEMA, IA data, FEMA NFIP data, and what we call SBA data, from the Small Business Administration. So Houston was set to receive $1.17 billion for housing recovery, but this amount was based on the old approach of calculating damage with FEMA and SBA data, layered over local data. And we knew this approach was not going to account for the full impact from the storm because not everyone applies to FEMA for assistance or SBA for assistance. So with the city understanding that they needed an innovative approach to understand the impact, a new approach to understand the impact and needs created by Hurricane Harvey, we put out an RFP and selected and hired a consulting group, Civis, Dewberry, and Knudsen. So what we needed was our consultants to implement something that would help us to account for all the housing units that were impacted in the city. So we needed to ensure that we got a good count on the damage estimation, the met needs, the unmet needs. We needed demographics and household attributes to make sure we were getting to the right population, and a flood risk and inundation model that would show where the waters truly went. And part of the information that was used was from drone footage for the Dewberry model to actually collect data as well. I just wanted to say that because I thought that was something that was pretty good, to go collect all the data from all over that people had and get the geographic references to find out flood depths and actual where some of the flooding was. So while waiting for all the other data to come in, the consultants started the new approach, the Dewberry model, which utilized hazardous flood modeling data and, like I mentioned, drone footage, local data, and other data sources to more fully understand the flooding impacts to Houston outside its floodways. And as you can see, in the lighter areas are areas away from the floodplains. Now, once we lay over all the DR17 data, as you can see, the water definitely extended outside the floodways. So that being the case, we needed the local housing needs assessment to be able to tell us exactly, or as close to as possible, where all the damages were. And Mr. Johnston is going to actually go over this part and tell you about this new approach that our consultants assisted us with.
Thank you, Doc. The City of Houston's Community Development Department was responsible for producing the local housing needs assessment. It was imperative to get the FEMA and the SA data as soon as possible to be utilized in the Civis platform for analytics, but the information came in pieces. So we received the NFIP data first, the SBA, and the IA data all at different times of the year. After we got the available data and collected the data, we integrated it for coding within the Civis platform to produce attribute tables for creating maps. As you can see, these are some of our attribute tables here. We were able to work with our consultants and their platform to identify data fields for spatial analytics that would be needed for the local housing needs assessment. Throughout this process, our database analysts worked very, very closely with our consultants. There were several data points and polygon data tables that allow our planners to create a list of maps that would be descriptive for the needs assessment. These are some of the maps here. It's about 30. We actually did about 50. With this new approach, we got the data and we were able to do a visualization that revealed a more realistic impact and the unmet needs funding needed for the existence after the housing and after the Hurricane Harvey incident or event. The new approach corrected the numbers for households and the costs for repair and actually gave us a different number. We needed about $870 million more for households, about $1.1 billion for repairs, which all equaled up to about $2 billion. These are some of the maps that came out of the needs assessment. This is the no federal assistance. This map shows the number of buildings by block group that lacked federal assistance or didn't qualify for the assistance, or maybe just didn't apply. This map is the repetitive and severe loss. As you can see, the repetitive and severe loss pretty much located around our floodways and our reservoirs to the west side of town. The inundation map shows the flood depths and the differential throughout the city. These homes, the substantially damaged homes, are also located around our floodways and our reservoirs on the west side of town. So with all the information, we was able to get the geography of the highest residential impact. And as you can see, a lot of it happened, a great percentage happened outside of the floodplain. Normally this never ever happened. So this was something that we never seen before. The results and product from the new approach was the local housing needs assessment. We also have we came up with an SVI map, which is a social vulnerability index map. And to give a little information on the social vulnerability index map, it identifies the vulnerable populations. So your low to moderate income households, your seniors, your people with disabilities. It's basically people who may not have the capacity to recover with private resources. But this first map was actually used with local knowledge, and it was an average of the percentage of income. We also did an interactive SVI map. This map was published in the Atlantic, which is a digital magazine. And with this map, we did the lowest fifth and the highest fifth of income. Doc, back to you.
All right, thank you for that, Pat. And as I said earlier, there were some things that derived from this new approach. And some of those were some maps that our GIS team was able to learn from the new approach as to how we plan and implement strategies for funding and create new solutions of our own. We needed environmental tools for qualifying site-specific household units. If you notice the orange hash in this map, and the required buffer at the regulated distance, these are the types of things that we learned from our consultants that we needed to show in a more infographic kind of way. So we had to package a lot of data, as you can tell, on these maps to ensure, based on whatever site came about, we would be able to account for and stay consistent and account for whatever that environmental concern would be. So we even hired environmental geographers to assist with the mass production. Also, these maps were generated using ArcGIS Pro, and for mass production, ArcPy was utilized to automate maps as well. Also with the tier 1 maps, because these were for tier 2 site-specific environmental reviews, we started packaging our maps to display as much information as possible. In this, you can see that we packaged in one map historical preservation and archaeological maps showing vegetation views with required buffering to capture any potential concerns. Our site-specific flood extents maps became very popular on the front end. These became maps that they wanted to see to make sure they were going down the right street, so to speak. And these would incorporate the Dewberry model, as you can see to the right. And they also give a view of site-specific flooding and what's happening in the vicinity. We also went to procure a tool which is known as Cyclomedia, which some of you may be familiar with, and this was procured for having street level imagery to perform preliminary environmental inspections on the front end. But other uses for this tool was for adding in the flood depths data, and that was mentioned earlier in one of Patrick's maps, and utilizing the elevation tool within it as well as to assist with future finished floor elevation data we expect to extract from this tool through an interlocal agreement with other agencies, multiple metropolitan agencies. So when the next flood comes, we'll be on the same accord with flood planning and future implementation. So this was used for environmental, but it was also utilized for future planning. We're using it for future planning for flooding. What we also used was ArcScene Online. So for the development of structures in Houston, an ordinance called Chapter 19, which it regulates the finished floor as it relates to building above the base floor flood elevation. So we kind of used this tool and worked in this tool with the base flood elevations and digital elevation modeling to attempt to see where structures would be impacted looking ahead with this new ordinance. In other words, we're starting to plan ahead because this flood really left a large impact on our housing units in the city of Houston. So another tool that we created for our disaster recovery team was some dashboards. These dashboards were created with ArcGIS Online Web App Builder. So in this, you see there are 9 stages. Within these stages, there starts at the qualifying piece where so this is the process for qualifying households and structures. So environmental is actually number 5 in here. So a lot of our maps which had to meet environmental compliance would fall in this phase or this stage. So we created these to be able to have this dashboard show all stages with data visualization that also allows for finding all data affiliated with each applicant for housing assistance. If they were to go up to the map and click a point, they would get all the affiliated data. So we kind of put in something that could hold all the data that was entailed as it relates to disaster recovery. And we also did it for month to month, as well as we also made an attempt to do week to week to assist disaster recovery with their efforts to keep up with everything that was going on, and for our upper management and senior staff to be able to report to the mayor and to council. So this concludes our presentation, and we hope this helps you kind of understand what we did from the geospatial perspective to assist our city with planning for disaster recovery. And I'd like to thank not only my staff, I want to make sure I thank you, Mr. Johnson, for participating in this presentation with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.